Welcome to Believe in the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk. This program is an outpouring of the ministry going on at Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Here's what's coming up in today's message.
They need to soften their hardened heart, is what they need. And Zedekiah, facing with all of this fulfilled prophecy of Jeremiah, and he just doesn't humble himself. Often rebels, they notice that they can't stop God's plan from unfolding. And so what do instead now? They lash out at God's servants.
Today on Believe in the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk, we turn to Jeremiah chapter 32, where the prophet is in prison for speaking God's truth. While locked away, God tells him to do something strange. Buy a field in a land about to be conquered. It made no sense, but it was a bold act of faith. Pastor Dan shows us that real faith doesn't wait for ideal circumstances. Even in dark times, obedience plants seeds of hope for the future God has promised. Let's join Pastor Dan in Jeremiah chapter 32 as he begins his message, Hope of Israel's Rebirth, Part 2.
Praise the Lord. Here we are in Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 32 is where we pick up tonight, and this really is the second half of four-chapter message that really goes together that we're doing here today. So I will catch you up to where we're at, because we're in the fifth of 6 sections of this book of Jeremiah. And so first section of the book really gave all the reasons for Judah's downfall. Remember, this is in the time period of the divided kingdom. Israel in the north has already been away for more than 100 years into captivity long ago, and it's really just the Israelites that are in Judah and Jerusalem, that area that's left, and their sins were described to them. And then even in chapter 7 through 10 in the second section of the book, Jeremiah went to the temple and he gave the temple sermon, declaring very openly and publicly what their condition was. The third section of the book of Jeremiah, up until chapter 20, he really got into the depths of their problem and described the heart condition. The problem was of their prideful heart. And that's always the degree of our problem. It's not some action that we did, but it's always a problem of the heart. And that whole section was all about that. Well, the fourth section that we finished up recently had Jeremiah present very personal letters to individuals or kings or groups of people in a much more individual way. And that brought us to the fifth section that we just started the last time. This fifth section can really be described as the main event. The main events are unfolding, the long-promised captivity of the Babylonians, where Babylon is coming in, and this third wave of captivity is really beginning and happening as this section starts. But in the main event section here, before it happens, before we get the historical account of Babylon coming and how that all lays out, he gives these 4 chapters in chapter 30 through 33 that is a section of hope. It's God giving them this hope of a promised restoration right on the cusp before all of the chapters about the Babylonian invasion and the captivity. It's just like, even here at the last moment, he's like giving them more hope. In fact, some of the verses and sections of verses in these 4 chapters are some of the most memorized of the entire book. Some of the section talks about how he's going to restore them and they're going to come back, and he knows the thoughts he has for them. He knows the plans he has for them to restore them, plans of peace, right? And these are some of the things most people remember about the book of Jeremiah. It comes from this very section, this message that we're doing here. We took it in 2 halves. We're calling it the hope of Israel's rebirth, and this is the second half of that message. In chapter 30 and 31, we saw Israel's brokenness will be turned to wholeness, and we saw how their mourning will be turned to joy. And we talked about how their outward religion will be turned finally to an inward relationship with Christ himself when they see him at the second coming. And now, in the second half of this message of hope about Israel being restored and being reborn in the end, God now instructs believers, really, any believer, whether it's from Israel or even for today, believers, on how to wait patiently for this hope and how to wait in true faith. And so a large portion of this chapter 32 and 33 is now going to say, wait patiently for this. So much of the specific revelation of that Israel will be reborn and they'll all be saved in the end as they all come to Jesus Christ. It was laid out in chapter 30, 31. And now he kind of says, okay, now wait patiently. Wait for it. It's coming. It's coming. But how do we wait? How do we wait? I think there's some really good indications in these 2 chapters about what it looks like to wait. Have you ever been given that, maybe, mom and dad goes away and they're like, listen, if you're really good while I'm in the store, I'll bring you, a piece of candy or something, right? When you were 5 and you did anything for a lollipop back then, right? And so, and how do you wait patiently? What would you do? How can you occupy yourself in the meantime until the promised reward comes? Well, I think a lot of that comes in these 2 chapters. There's a lot of indication for what does it look like to wait for the Lord? Okay, we've got this hope that he's coming back and things are going to get restored, but how do you wait in the meantime? Well, Jeremiah is going to be imprisoned in chapter 32. It won't be the first time or the last time. And so it's going to take some patience. Some of us feel like we've been imprisoned in life in some ways, right? Anytime you feel like, things are just out of my control. I don't have the ability to change my situation. That's a bit of an imprisonment. Right? And so you can really relate to Jeremiah being physically imprisoned. So let's take a look at some aspects of our faith, a faith that's needed to wait patiently as the Lord is in the process of bringing about this restoration. So the first point I want to make as we begin chapter 32 here is that we wait patiently in hope with a publicly active faith. As opposed to, we don't say, well, I believe this is what's going to happen. Now I'm going to go hole myself away in some stronghold and never come out. And I'm going to bunker down and I'm going to get my supplies of, MREs to eat for the next 50 years. And I'm never coming out to interact with you. That's not God's plan. You do know that, right? We're waiting patiently ourselves for him to come back. And it's not God's plan for you just to go bunker into some safe place and never come out and interact with anybody. Although that's kind of the culture we live in these days. Nobody wants to come out and interact with anybody. But that is not God's plan. In fact, even the New Testament, Jesus describes it this way when he says, occupy until I come. And the word occupy literally is the word for economy. And economy means buying, selling, trading. There's an interaction happening between people. And that's the Lord's commission to us in the meantime while we wait. To occupy until he comes. And we see an active faith of Jeremiah in this chapter as he's waiting for the Lord to do all of his promised restoration for Israel. Let's begin this here in chapter 32, verse 1. I'll start off in verse 1. The word that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh in the 10th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, which was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And verse 2, now at that time, the military force of the king of Babylon was besieging Jerusalem. That's a specific word, besieging. You remember all your old, even Lord of the Rings and everything else, right? Besieging is this idea where sometimes they would build the ramps and the towers to come up and to get over the walls. Sometimes they would just take the time to build up the dirt and make a ramp of dirt to go up to the top of the walls and get in. So this is besieging the city involved making a way for the army to get in, but also stopping anybody from getting out. So they would dry up their food and water. So this is what's been happening to Jerusalem specifically. Look at this date though here. Babylon has been besieging Jerusalem since the 9th year, 10th month, 10th day of Zedekiah's reign. We get that from 2 Kings in the historical account of Babylon coming here to invade in 586 BC. They began before that. In the 9th year, 10th month, 10th day, they began this siege. Did you catch the date there in verse 1? It is the 10th year. Okay? So this siege of Babylon has already been happening for a number of months. In fact, we find out that Babylon will end up prevailing in this siege in the 11th year, 4th month, 9th day. It's almost a 2-year siege that Babylon is sieging the city. But you say, why did it take so long? Well, partially because they had to lift the siege at one point. Egypt came to support Israel, and Babylon felt threatened by Egypt coming. So Babylon backed off and diverted many of their military might to this threat of Egypt coming out of the land. It forced Egypt back into their homeland, and then Babylon came right back to the siege of Babylon. In fact, we'll find out in a little while that there was just a few other cities in Judah that had not yet been taken yet, like Lachish. Lachish actually is famous in the sense that there is a lot of archaeology that came out of Lachish. The Lachish letters were written. We'll get into more of that later on. And so the Lachish letters tell us about these events as well as the scripture account. But this siege of Babylon had lasted for about 2 years. But it's important to recognize that in the midst of this siege, Babylon lifted it for a period of time and then came right back to the siege. That's important. We'll get to that later on why that's important. But notice here, it's the 10th year. All right, so this is a good indication that they had already lifted the siege and now they're back at it. They're back at the siege. So this is the very end of the very end of the very end before Babylon finally conquers. And now just to continue in verse 2, they were besieging Jerusalem, and Jeremiah the prophet was shut up in the court of the guard, which is in the house of the king of Judah. And in verse 3, they did that because Zedekiah, the king of Judah, had shut him up there, saying, "Why do you prophesy, saying, Thus saith Yahweh, Behold, I am about to give this city into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he will capture it." And in verse 4, and so that's what Zedekiah was saying about Jeremiah. That's why they put him in jail. And then to continue verse 4, and Zedekiah, king of Judah, will not escape out of the hand of the Chaldeans, but he will surely be given into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he will speak with him face to face and see him eye to eye. And verse 5, and he will lead Zedekiah to Babylon, and he will be there until I visit him, declares Yahweh. Zedekiah is saying to the prophet, why are you saying all of these things? And finally, in verse 5 there, if you fight against the Chaldeans, you will not succeed. So finally, Jeremiah is here shut up in prison, and this is why. Zedekiah actually witnesses to the very words of why he shut up Jeremiah in prison, because he was not happy with the fact that Jeremiah was saying that Judah is going to fall. Babylon will win. And Zedekiah didn't like that. There was no bone in his body that was ready to submit to this. And so what's so fascinating here with King Zedekiah, this last king of Judah, is that he has been witnessing the fulfillment of all of the different things that Jeremiah has been saying. He's been firsthand a witness to these things happening, and yet he continues to harden his heart more and more. The more things happen, the more Babylon is there. He just doesn't want to accept it. It reminds you of Pharaoh, right? You remember Pharaoh of old when Moses is coming saying, let my people go, God said. And Pharaoh wouldn't do it. And then he saw a miracle, and saw 2 miracles, they saw 3 miracles. And he's like, I guess you can go sacrifice in the desert. No, we want to leave. And so all it was doing was hardening Pharaoh more into his position. And you'd think that as somebody sees revelation of God more and more and more, that would be the trigger, right? Wouldn't you think? You see the hand of God, you see another miracle, you see another fulfilled prophecy, you'd think that's it. They're going to turn, they're going to believe. No, that's not what makes somebody believe. It's not about the fact that they need more evidence. It never is. It's about a heart that doesn't want to submit. That is always the case. Once you give somebody some evidence to believe the scriptures are true and Jesus actually rose from the dead, they don't need anything else. Oh, they may stand there in front of you and say, well, if I just had a little more evidence. That's not what they need. They need to soften their hardened heart is what they need. And Zedekiah, facing with all of this fulfilled prophecy of Jeremiah, and he just doesn't humble himself. Often rebels, they notice that they can't stop God's plan from unfolding. And so what do they do instead now? They lash out at God's servants. That's what the king here is doing. Well, if I can't get to God, then I'm going to get his servant Jeremiah and I'm going to put him in jail. And that's exactly what he does. So don't be surprised if they do that to you, Christian, right? Well, if I can't stop God from doing a work, then I'll try to get his servant in trouble. So don't be surprised if the world comes after you. They have no power over God, so they try to display their futile displays of control against his church and against his people, right? Let them try. What did Jesus say, actually? He said, don't fear those that can kill your body, but fear the one that can throw your body and soul into hell. That's the one you should be concerned about. In other words, if we concern ourselves with what God thinks of us, then don't worry about what anybody else thinks. Their reign will come to an end. But God's won't. So worry about what he thinks of your situation. And so here we find Jeremiah in prison finally. They've lashed out at God's servant. He's in prison. And let's read a large section here starting in verse 6. Jeremiah said, the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, behold, Hanamel, the son of Shallum, your uncle, is coming to you, saying, buy for yourself my field, which is in the town of Anathoth, for you have the legal judgment or the right of redemption to buy it. And so God is telling Jeremiah this while he's in prison, okay? So verse 8, then Hanamel, my uncle's son, or my cousin, came to me in the court of the guard according to the word of Yahweh. And he said to me, buy my field, please. That is in Anathoth, which is in the land of Benjamin, for you have the legal right for possession, or that's called the right of redemption. This is a Jewish law. We'll get into that. And the redemption is yours, so buy it for yourself. Then I knew that it was the word of the Lord. So in verse 9, I bought the field, which was at Anathoth, from Hanamel, my uncle's son, and I weighed out the silver for him. It was 17 shekels of silver. And in verse 10, I signed and sealed the deed and called in witnesses and weighed out the silver on the scales. And then in verse 11, I took the deeds of purchase, both the sealed copy containing the commandment and statutes, and also the open copy. And in verse 12, I gave the deed of purchase to Baruch, the son of Neri. This is his personal scribe, his own secretary. The son of Neri, the son of Maaseiah, in the sight of Hanamel, my uncle's son, and in the sight of the witnesses who signed the deed of purchase, in the sight of all the Jews who were sitting in the court of the guard. So this is a very, very public transaction. Do you get the point? And so what happens here? Well, this field is in Anathoth of Benjamin. This is the town where Jeremiah is from. The situation here, though, is what? Babylon has already invaded twice. They already control all of the hill country, all of the countryside. There's only a few cities with walls that are still remaining. And here the Lord tells Jeremiah, this cousin of yours is going to come and want you to buy this land of his from him that's out in the country. Controlled by Babylon. And the Lord doesn't explicitly say buy it, but that's the intention. That's what the Lord's saying. When he comes, buy it from him. And so this field is already worthless. Think about this cousin Hanamel, right? Has there ever been a more selfish or rude prison visit, right? Like, oh, I'm here to see you in prison. How you doing, buddy? I'm sorry you're in here. Hey, would you buy this land from me that's worthless? I mean, come on. Think about it. Think about this guy, Hanamel, that comes and says, buy this land. I mean, I'm sure it's one of two things. It's either outright pride, where he's just trying to turn a buck, knowing he could take advantage of the faithful guy. Oh, that's going to happen to you sometimes, Christian. Wait till that happens to you, if it hasn't already. Where somebody says, this guy's a believer. I know I can get away with something on him because they're going to do things square. They're not going to cheat. And they try to get away with things because you're a believer. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe that was Hanamel's heart. Or maybe his heart was simply one of just absolute terror and fear. And he's just trying to hoard as much money as he can. He's in terror for what's going to happen to his future. And he's just thinking, I got to get as much money as I can to prepare. See, the man of faith doesn't go that far. The man of faith is like, okay, well, look, if the Lord calls us to hard times, then he's told us we're going to live by daily bread, right? And that he'll take care of me one day at a time. And the faithful man never gets to this point that Hanamel. Whether this guy's motivation was out of sheer terror or out of just selfish pride, either way, it's this visit of this guy to come to prison to take advantage of him like this. I mean, it's just classic, flesh versus faith paradox. You've got this man of the flesh coming to this faithful man, Jeremiah. Doesn't it remind you of Esau? Do you remember the story of Esau in the Old Testament? One of the first things we learn about Esau, right, is he's out and he's starving, he's dying, he's going to die. And he thinks he's going to die anyway. And he comes to his brother Jacob, and Jacob's got the soup on, man. He heard the dinner bell. And he comes and he thinks he's going to die. And he's like, give me your food. I need your food. And he sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of soup because he was so desperate. It's a combination of, in Esau's case, of desperation, but also absolute spite for the things that God wanted. He had that little value in the birthright to pass down the blessing from generation to generation. It didn't mean anything to him. And again, classic example of the fleshly man versus the spiritual man. What do you value? What do you value is the question. Jeremiah is going to put his faith in God, knowing this land is going to be worth way more than 17 shekels one day. And he's going to profit in the stock market of real estate because of his faith. So Don't think you're being taken advantage of. When you walk by faith, God will do great things, even in this way. So the spiritual people like Jeremiah here, they often get these great chances to show their faith in a very public way, in a very big spectacle. So the purchase of this field, which had no value at the time, in fact, it's going to end up having no value for Jeremiah. It will for Jeremiah's family after him, after the 70 years of Babylonian captivity are done. But this land will really have no value for Jeremiah. But it's a faith token to say, I believe that this land will be valuable, and this land will be ours, and there will be a benefit to having this. So this is a chance for Jeremiah to do the classic phrase, put your money where your mouth is, literally, right? And he does. He does. And I'm telling you, this is one of the shortcomings of the modern church today. We got a lot of words, lots of words coming out of our mouth, but do we put our money where our mouth is? And I literally mean money. Yes, I do. But I also mean your time, your efforts, your heart, your mind. Are we putting our things that we think are worthy into valuable things like serving the Lord? And Jeremiah did. And he had these chances to actively exercise his faith in front of people to show them, I believe this. Do you think your words of faith are going to change people's lives, or do you think your life of faith are going to change other people's lives? It's a life of faith that has a much, much greater opportunity to change people's lives. So these land ownership procedures, these are all described in the law of Moses. Isn't it interesting, though, that Israel still followed some of the law that God gave them through Moses, right? What's the big condemnation? Why are they going into captivity? Because they didn't follow some of the laws, right? Like the Sabbath rests. They were serving other gods like Baal. And so they broke so many of the laws. But yet some of the laws of Moses they still kept. Like this one, the law of how you transact land and who it should go to. What's so fascinating about this to me is that they seem to have no problem keeping God's civil law, but they had a hard time keeping God's moral law. And that tends to be the same thing for people today. They have no problem keeping the laws that will benefit them in some fashion or bring just order in some fashion. But that God has a right to regulate my morality? I don't want to think about that. And so they're doing the same thing. So when you think about this nation of Israel and you think about God's condemnation of them for violating his law, don't think that they didn't think that of themselves. They wouldn't have said to you, yeah, I'm a lawbreaker. I bet you half the nation would have said, I'm doing everything I can to keep the law. And yet there was only some of it that they chose to think about. I dare say that's still the church today. Some in the church are like, I love the Bible. Oh, really? How much of it have you read? Like a book. How long have you been saved? 50 years. I've only read a book. What? So there's too many of us that are like, yes, Jesus. Yes, love Jesus. What do you know about him? Nothing. What? How do you not know? Read it. It's right here. Come to know him. Grow. Look, we're not giving anybody a guilt trip that's learning and growing. We get it. Everybody's on a pace to learn and grow. But the question is, are you? Are you? There's too many people that say, I know, I love Jesus. Yes, go Jesus. And they just don't know anything about him. Press into it. Learn who he is. Don't keep just some of his commands. Think about the ones you're trying to ignore that he has said. I dare say we all have some of them that we're like, I'll get back to that one, Jesus. That's a good one. Yeah. Don't want to think about that one right now. They kept some of them. They kept some of the laws. Let's go to verse 13. And I commanded Baruch, this is Jeremiah's secretary, in the sight of them all, saying, Thus saith Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, take these deeds, this deed of purchase that is sealed, one as well as this open deed, and put them in an earthenware jar, or a clay vessel, that they may last for a long time. For thus says Yahweh of hosts in verse 15, the God of Israel, houses and fields and vineyards will again be bought in this land. And so this method of having this scroll that was the actual title deed to the land, this is a practice that was used not just in Israel, but in many, many of these ancient cultures. I actually want to touch on this a second, this idea of the fact that they had this sealed scroll that would have been sealed with the scroll of the one that sold it, and probably also the seal of the one who bought it.
You've been listening to Believe in the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk. Jeremiah's field purchase was a quiet but powerful statement. I still believe God keeps His word. When life feels locked down or uncertain, keep walking in faith. What looks like a waste to the world may be worship in God's eyes. To hear this teaching again, to share it with someone you love, or to learn more about the ministry, visit cchambersburg.org. While you're on our website, be sure to check out our media section. Under the Media and Radio tab, you'll find an archive of past teachings. Or you can easily download our app on your smart device to stay connected to Believe in the Word anywhere. If you're in the Chambersburg, Pennsylvania area, we'd love for you to come join us in person. Our location is 5121 Coffee Avenue, Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, 17201. Service time and directions are available online at cchambersburg.org. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to have you join us next time as Pastor Dan continues his teaching through the book of Jeremiah. This has been Believe in the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk.